The smell of roasted chicken and perfume hit me before I even stepped through the door. Mason's house always looked like a magazine spread, white marble floors, polished wood stairs, a chandelier glowing over the entryway. I balanced my velvet cake in one hand, the little dress draped carefully over my arm. It was supposed to be a celebration. I had spent 3 nights sewing tiny daisy appliques onto the hem, picturing Lila twirling in it, her braids bouncing. But there was no twirl, no rush of footsteps. Just silence broken by clinking glasses and low laughter from the dining room. I set the cake down on the counter, scanning the room. Mason stood near the bar, pouring drinks, smiling at some cousin I barely knew. Brielle leaned against the kitchen island, her wine-glass tilted phone glowing in her other hand. And in the corner of the living room, half hidden behind the couch, was a small figure with a too big pink cap pulled low over her forehead. I walked toward her slowly, the way you approach a bird you don't want to scare off. "Lila," I called softly. "Grandma's here." She didn't lift her head. Only when I crouched down did she whisper, "Don't look at me, Grandma." Her little fingers twisted the hem of her sweater. My heart skipped. I reached out and touched the edge of her cap. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" She trembled, but didn't stop me. I eased the cap off and froze. Her scalp was bare, pale under the lights, with tiny scratches where the razor had gone too close. The braids I used to brush before school gone. Across the room, Brielle laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the hush. "It's just hair. Don't be dramatic, Coraline." She raised her glass like a toast. Mason didn't even turn. I held the cap in my hand, staring at my granddaughter's head, the weight of it heavier than any cake or dress I'd ever carried. And as Lila pressed herself against me, trembling, I knew this wasn't just a bad haircut. Something far worse had happened, and I couldn't stay silent any longer. I guided Lila gently down the hallway, away from the chatter, the wine glasses, the clinking of forks against porcelain. My hand never left her shoulder. The bathroom door clicked shut behind us, muffling the party's laughter into something that sounded more like distant static. I kneeled so we were eye level. She stood still, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her bald head gleamed under the vanity light, and now that I looked closer, I could see a thin red scratch curving just behind her ear. I reached for a washcloth, with trembling fingers wet it with warm water and dabbed gently. She didn't flinch, but she didn't speak either. "Lila," I said barely above a whisper. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what happened?" She looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were glassy, not from tears, but from something deeper. Numbness. "Mommy said I was dirty," she murmured. "And ugly." My breath caught in my throat. She said I looked disgusting with hair all over, and I didn't listen. So she said, if I wanted to act like an animal, I should look like one. I put a hand to my chest to steady myself. She made me sit in the bathtub, and she turned on the loud machine. It hurt. She paused, then whispered, "She said if I told you, she'd cut my eyelashes next time." I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone with shaking hands, and took a picture of the back of her head, the scratch, the red line near her temple. Then another, and another, angles no one could deny. Lila watched me quietly, her arms still locked around her waist. "Please don't make me go back tonight," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please, Grandma." I looked at her, at the way she didn't cry, at the way she stood like a statue too small to hold that much fear. And something inside me snapped, not loud, not violent, just final. I opened the bathroom door and stepped into the hallway, holding my phone tight in one hand, and Lila's fingers in the other. I held Lila's hand as we walked back through the hallway. No one noticed we were gone. The music had gotten louder, the voices more animated. Brielle was now laughing with 2 of Mason's co-workers. Mason caught my eye briefly across the room, but his expression didn't change. He didn't ask where we'd been. I told him once years ago that Brielle yelled too much. Lila had been 3, then barely able to form sentences, but I'd watched her flinch when Brielle raised her voice. We were at the zoo, of all places. Lila had asked for a juice box. Brielle yanked her away from the snack stand and snapped, "If you keep begging, you won't get anything ever." I said gently, "Maybe she's just thirsty." Mason's response came fast, almost rehearsed. "She's not being cruel, Mom. She's just strict. It's called parenting." And I let it go. I let it go when Brielle called Lila slow for not tying her shoes fast enough. I let it go when she told Lila she was too sensitive after she cried because she was scared of thunder. I let it go every time Mason told me to stop meddling. I convinced myself it wasn't my place. But it was. Every time I bit my tongue, I felt it. The pull between protecting my granddaughter and not wanting to be shut out of her life. Because I knew Brielle could do that. She could move Lila across the country, and I'd never see her again. So I stayed quiet. I smiled at birthday parties. I handed Brielle gifts at Christmas. I said thank you when she sent me the occasional photo of Lila at school. Now, holding this child's trembling hand, feeling the small weight of her trust, I couldn't stop the shame rising in my throat. I had let so much slide just to stay included, and now the cost was written across Lila's bare scalp, my heart pounding. I didn't need anyone's permission. I had what mattered, Lila, and I was done asking if it was okay to protect her. I walked back into the living room with Lila tucked behind me, her small fingers clutching the fabric of my sleeve. The music still played, the smell of food still hung in the air, but the party felt hollow now, like a stage set, where everyone was acting a part. Brielle looked up from her phone, her wine glass poised like a prop, and smirked. "Why would you shave a 5-year-old's head?" My voice was steady, but it carried through the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates. Even Mason's friends turned to look. Brielle rolled her eyes, as if I'd just asked about a misplaced napkin. "Because she doesn't listen," she said, with a little laugh. "She fights every time I try to brush her hair." This solved the problem. "She's a child," I said. "You humiliated her. It's just hair, Coraline. It grows back. Don't be so dramatic." I felt Lila's grip tighten, her little nails digging into my arm. "She's terrified," I said, my voice rising despite myself. Mason stepped forward, holding a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched. "Mom, please," he said in that patient tone he uses when he thinks I'm embarrassing him. "Don't make a scene at my party." A scene. I turned toward him. "Your daughter is sitting here bald and shaking." "That's the scene." He rubbed his forehead. "Brielle's the parent. She decides about her hair. You can't interfere." I looked at him, my only son, the boy I raised alone after his father left. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. Around us, the guests shifted uncomfortably. Brielle sipped her wine like a queen surveying her court. I crouched briefly to whisper to Lila, "Stay right here, sweetheart." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. Then I straightened, feeling something inside me settle. I wasn't asking anymore. I reached for Lila's coat on the back of a chair, my purse from the counter, and held out my hand to her. "We're leaving," I said quietly. And together we walked toward the front door without looking back. The sound of our footsteps on the tile was the only thing I could hear as we moved toward the door. Not a single guest said a word. No one reached out. They just watched, eyes wide, mouths shut, as a grandmother walked a little girl out of what was supposed to be her own home. I had one hand on Lila's coat, and the other wrapped tightly around hers. Her small steps tried to keep up with mine, but she didn't resist. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look back. "Where do you think you're going?" Brielle's voice cracked through the silence. "She's my daughter." I didn't stop. "Coraline, you can't just take her." Still, I didn't stop. Mason's voice came next, lower, but no less sharp. Mom, don't do this. You're making it worse. I opened the front door. The cold air hit our faces, and I pulled Lila's coat around her shoulders before lifting her into the car. I fastened her seatbelt with shaking fingers. She looked at me, still quiet, still watching. We drove the short distance to my house in silence. When we got inside, I gave her a warm towel, a cup of milk, and one of my old button-down shirts to sleep in. She curled up on the couch under my blanket, her eyes never closing, but her body slowly relaxing, like she was waiting to see if this was real. I stepped into the kitchen and called Ingrid. She picked up on the second ring. "Ingrid, it's me," I said. "I need your help." She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "Tell me everything." By the time we hung up, I had a name for a child advocacy attorney, a list of what to document, and a plan. I spent the rest of that night at the kitchen table, my phone spread out beside a stack of notebooks. Lila had finally drifted into a restless sleep in the guest room, clutching one of my old teddy bears. I opened the photo folder and scrolled through the images of her shaved scalp, each one more painful than the last. My hands trembled as I attached them to an email for the lawyer Ingrid had recommended. I added the short audio clip I'd recorded in the bathroom. Lila's small, broken voice whispering about being called dirty and ugly, about the threat to cut her eyelashes. My own breathing was loud on the recording. I had to force myself to listen through it again so I'd know exactly what evidence I had. Before sending it, I searched my old text messages. There were dozens from neighbors over the past 2 years, little notes about hearing Brielle yell about Lila's sudden changes in behavior. At the time, I'd told myself they were exaggerating. Now, each message read like a warning I'd ignored. I forwarded every one of them to the lawyer. Ingrid called back just after midnight. "I'll testify," she said, without hesitation. "I saw how that woman spoke to Lila in public. I'll tell the court everything I've witnessed." Her voice steadied me more than she knew. When I hung up, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. I opened a new notebook and began writing. Every incident I remembered, every cruel remark, every time Lila had shrunk into herself at family gatherings, I wrote it all down. And then I added tonight. Her whispers, the pink cap, Brielle's laughter. I glanced at the clock. 2 a.m. My pen hovered over the last line. I will not let this happen again. Then I closed the notebook, walked to the guest room, and stood in the doorway, watching Lila sleep. She stirred once, mumbling something I couldn't make out. I sat beside her, smoothing my hand over her fragile scalp, and thought about what I needed to do when the sun came up. The sky outside was still gray when my phone rang. I hadn't slept. I was sitting at the table again, reviewing the checklist the lawyer had sent proof of harm timeline witness statements. I almost didn't answer, but something in my chest said I should. "Mason," I said, not even trying to hide how tired I was. His voice was barely more than a breath. "Mom." He didn't say anything for a moment, just silence. Then a sharp inhale. "Brielle isn't okay," he finally said. "She hasn't been okay for a while. Last night after you left, she broke things. Screamed, said she didn't remember shaving Lila's head, said she felt like she was outside her body." I closed my eyes. I'd heard that tone before. Panicked, defensive, lost. It was the voice of a man who had finally seen the damage he'd been denying. She cut her own arm," he continued. "Just shallow, but I didn't know what to do." I said nothing. "Please," he whispered, "don't take this to court. She just needs help. Therapy. Medication. Something. But please don't destroy our family." I stood up and walked to the window. Lila was curled on the couch with my cardigan wrapped around her, breathing softly, her thumb in her mouth like she used to do as a toddler. "Mason," I said quietly, "get her help." He exhaled in what sounded like relief. "But Lila is not going back into that house. Not now." Maybe not ever. His voice cracked. You're really going to take her from us? I turned from the window. You let her live in fear, Mason. You watched it happen. You told me not to make a scene while your wife tore your daughter down piece by piece. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There was silence on the line again. Then a soft, broken, okay. He hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down, walked to the living room, and gently lifted Lila's head onto my lap. She stirred, blinked up at me, and whispered, "Are we safe now?" I didn't answer. I just nodded and held her close as the morning sun finally broke through the window. The first time she laughed, it was over something small. I was trying to fold a fitted sheet and failed miserably. It bunched and tangled, and I pretended to wrestle it like it was alive. She giggled quiet at first, unsure of herself, like the sound was foreign. But it was there. After that, I chased it like light breaking through clouds. We developed our own rhythm. Mornings started with blueberry pancakes, afternoons with puzzles or sidewalk chalk, and evenings with stories. Always 2, sometimes 3, if she asked softly enough. I found soft cotton hats with silly animal ears and let her pick which one to wear each day. She liked the one with the bunny face best. When I brushed the light fuzz growing back on her scalp, I was careful. She sat on a cushion on the floor, and I ran the soft bristled brush over her head while telling her about the time Mason tried to eat crayons as a toddler. She laughed again, this time louder. We planted flowers outside the kitchen window, marigolds and pansies. She called them her sun friends. She started to draw again. Her pictures filled my refrigerator, flowers with smiling faces, our garden, and one that made me stop cold. It was of the 2 of us holding hands in front of my house. She'd drawn herself with a full head of curly hair and a giant heart above us. I knelt beside her, pointed at it, and asked, "Who's that?" She grinned. "That's me, and that's you. And the heart means I feel safe here." I hugged her without speaking, afraid my voice would shake too much. At night, she started sleeping deeper. No more whimpers. No more jerking awake. One evening, she crawled into my lap and said, "I think my hair is growing because I'm happy again." I didn't correct her. I just kissed the crown of her head and rocked her slowly. And the next morning, we got in the car together. Not to run errands, not to hide, but to go to the courthouse. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Echoes of footsteps, the shuffle of papers, the quiet clicking of pens, everything felt sharper in that room. Lila sat beside me at the long wooden bench, her legs swinging above the floor. She was coloring a picture of a tree, adding pink dots for blossoms. Across from us, Brielle looked like a shadow of herself. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, eyes rimmed in dark circles, lips pressed in a hard, straight line. Still, she held her head high, defiant, not remorseful. Mason sat beside her, slumped silent, avoiding my eyes. He hadn't called again. The judge entered, and everything shifted. I stood when told, sat when told, answered clearly when asked. Our lawyer presented the photos, the audio clip, statements from 2 neighbors, Ingrid's affidavit. The judge listened without interruption, reading through the file slowly, methodically. When it was Brielle's turn, she didn't deny it. She said she was overwhelmed, that parenting was hard, that she was trying to get better. Her voice trembled, but not once did she look at Lila. The judge asked her why she hadn't sought help before. Brielle mumbled something about not wanting to appear weak. Then the ruling came. Coraline Maynard is granted temporary custody for a period of 6 months, pending further evaluation. Brielle Mathers will complete a court-ordered psychological assessment and must attend parenting therapy. I heard a soft breath beside me. Lila still coloring her hand, slowing for just a moment. Mason stood. I thought he might say something, but he only nodded to the judge, eyes still on the floor. As they walked past us, Brielle glanced at Lila. Lila didn't look up. Outside the courthouse, I lifted Lila into my arms. She was getting heavier. stronger. As I buckled her into the back seat, she looked up at me and asked, "Do I get to stay at your house forever?" I smiled gently and said, "For as long as you want, sweetheart." The soil was soft beneath our fingers, warm, rich smelling of earth and promise. Lila had her tiny gardening gloves on the yellow ones, with the little frogs on the palms. She held a packet of sunflower seeds in one hand and a plastic trowel in the other, brow furrowed like a little architect planning her masterpiece. "Do you know why I want sunflowers?" "Grandma," she asked, kneeling beside me. I looked up from where I was digging a shallow row. "Why's that?" "Because they always look up, even when it's cloudy. They wait for the sun." I smiled, blinking faster than I needed to. "That's a good reason." She pressed a seed gently into the dirt, then another. "I like who I am here," she said quietly. My breath caught for just a moment, not because it surprised me, but because of how certain her voice was, how sure she sounded for someone who used to whisper her words like secrets. I reached over and squeezed her hand. We planted rows together, sunflowers, marigolds, a few tulips we found on sale. She wanted to name them all. The first one she called Daisy, even though it wasn't. The second one was Sunshine. The third, Hope. After we finished, we sat on the porch steps, our hands dirty and our knees sore. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you think they'll grow tall?" she asked. "They already are," I said. "You just can't see it yet." The breeze picked up, and somewhere inside the house, the wind chime above the kitchen window began to sing. I thought about everything we had left behind, people expectations, the silence we used to live in. And I didn't miss any of it. What I had now was a child learning to love herself, a garden full of names, and a house that finally felt like it had a heartbeat. Lila sat up suddenly, pointing. "That one's dancing," she said, laughing. I followed her finger. It was only a breeze. But she was right. The flower moved like it was alive. "Just like us,"